All right. It does look like numbers are starting to slow down, so I think we can get started. The first few minutes are just some administrative stuff, so we'll let everyone else trickle in. Again, thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, 2025 IT Trends, Navigating the Future of IT Management and Innovation. We're super excited to have you all. I'm super excited to have Andrew Hewitt from Forrester here in collaboration with us to present to you all. Before we jump in and introduce ourselves and the content, I want to go over some administrative items. First, this webinar will be recorded. You will receive the recording within the next week or so. Take some time to process everything, but we will send it out to you as soon as it's available. If you find it valuable, which we hope you do, share it with your colleagues, share it with your fellow IT leaders. Hopefully, they can get some value out of it as well. There is a chat function and a Q&A function that we encourage you to use. Andrew and I have our views on the trends and innovations in IT in 2025, but we've got several hundred IT leaders here on the phone with us. So we want to hear from you and your thoughts as well. You'll learn as much from each other as you do from us. So the more you engage, the more valuable this is. And then the Q&A section, if you have questions that you want us to answer, drop them into the Q&A section and we'll make sure to get to them. We do expect to have a bit of time at the end for all of you to ask those questions and get them responded to. So drop them in and we'll make sure we get to them. With that, let's jump in and introduce ourselves. My name is Pete Bretton. I am the VP of Product Strategy at NinjaOne, focused on what we build, how we build it, and collecting feedback from customers to make sure that the products we build are the things that you want. And I'd like to introduce Andrew Hewitt from Forrester, who I'm really excited to have on with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Pete. It's an honor to be here. Super excited to talk about the upcoming year. Yeah, like you mentioned, I'm a principal analyst at Forrester. For those that don't know Forrester, we're a global market research company. We're based out of Boston. I myself am out of Boulder, Colorado, so I know there were a couple other Colorado folks on the chat as well. Hello to you, but thanks everybody for joining. I'm super excited for the conversation. I would say this year is going to be one of the biggest years of transition in the endpoint management market. So we're going to go through a lot of the different trends today, and I think it'll be an exciting conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. One of the reasons we reached out and had you on this call is Andrew has an incredible career speaking to IT ops and infrastructure leaders on the topics of endpoint management, on digital employee experience, and mobility. And there really isn't anyone in the space we would prefer to have to come on and talk with you all about the trends coming up in 2025. So to kick us off, before we jump into the meat of the presentation and the conversation today, I'd like to present this research that Andrew shared with us around the biggest challenges in adopting automation technologies in organizations today. So this is a large survey delivered from Forrester on automation, and it touches on a lot of the topics we're going to talk about today. Things like skill gaps, things like change management in organizations, things like vendor partnerships, and even things like fear of job loss among employees. So Andrew, would love to hear your thoughts on this research and why it's so relevant today.
Yeah, so I think the topic of automation is so relevant to a lot of the clients that I work with at Forrester, particularly when it comes to their energy computing strategy, but specifically their endpoint management strategy, right? The world has changed so much. I mean, you mentioned I've been covering this space upwards of almost 11 years now. I started on the MDM side, started covering EMM, went to UEM, and now we're moving even beyond, concepts of unified endpoint management. And all this has meant that a lot of IT organizations today are having to do more than they've ever had to do, right? And so automation is a key component of that. I think the thing that really surprised me the most here, which I thought was super interesting, are these top two responses. The biggest challenges being technology skills and experience with automation lacking among both non-technical staff and technical staff. So it's not as if, the technical staff have an idea of how to do a lot of this automation just because they are able to write scripts and do all this more complex stuff. But it's also the case that the non-technical staff don't feel like they have enough of that background to be out there doing some of this more complex automation. So there's a big skills gap across the organization. It doesn't really matter whether you're technically oriented or a non-technical person, there's still that major challenge out there. And so it's on the onus of the organization to develop that culture to allow these roles to change and experiment and innovate. So we'll talk a lot about that today and how you can get started and some success stories that I've heard from clients that I've spoken with, and hopefully leave you with some good ideas to take away from this webinar.
I'm glad you called out that automation isn't just being able to write scripts. When you look at complex automation that really delivers the value that automation can, it's like building a product. You can deliver a script and solve a problem, and there's a lot of value in doing that and saving time through simple script deployment. But when you really look at building automation that's resilient and lasting and has an organizational impact, it goes well beyond just building a script and deploying it. And so looking at how you can prioritize automation, build the skills that you need to leverage them, and then also building a culture of automation is so critical, as you said, in every part of IT. So let's jump into the topics for today. This will be the last slide you guys see. After this, it will just be Andrew and I chatting up here. And like I said, toss out questions, interrupt us in chat if you can, so that we can dig into areas you want to dig in more. But the 5 areas we really want to talk about today are those macro business trends that impact IT leaders. When you look at IT today, a lot of IT leaders can get stuck focused just on the IT challenges that they face and ignore the broader trends in the market that are impacting business that will eventually impact IT leaders themselves. So, what are those big business trends that are impacting or will impact IT leaders? Number 2 is looking at automation, particularly in IT ops and infrastructure. How do you adopt it? How do you build a culture of automation? And how do you make sure you're getting the value out of it as an organization so that you can continue to invest there? Number 3 is that changing preference of IT leaders from point solutions to platforms. You ask Andrew, you ask any of his fellow analysts at Forrester, you ask any enterprise IT leader, there is a preference today for a platform approach to IT. Now, you never want to do that at the expense of efficiency, effectiveness, and security. But there is this trend, and we want to know why and how we can expect that to materialize over the next few years. A growing refocus on end user outcomes. This one's really interesting to me, and I know Andrew, it's a big focus of your work. I have a great anecdote from a customer. We were trying to understand the metrics that IT leaders care about. And one IT leader said to me, I don't care so much about metrics. I just don't want to get yelled at. And I get yelled at when end users get frustrated. And, I think that goes to show what we're going to talk about there with end user outcomes. And then finally, the growing unification of security and IT workflows. More and more IT is taking on more security work, and more you see these two workflows coming together in the most mature and efficient organizations. Some organizations, not so much, but we're going to dig into that. So with this, I'm going to actually shut off my slides here, and we're going to jump right in with our first question. Hopefully you can see our faces, which is more interesting than slides. And we'll jump into that first question. Andrew, I would really love to hear from you the business trends, the macro trends that are happening across industries and regions that are really impacting how IT is managed and delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question, and I sort of referenced this up front. But when I speak to IT leaders, the sentiment today is always, I need to do more with less. I'm getting pressure from the CFO to reduce my cost, to have more automation, but I'm also getting pressure from other parts of the business to provide more choice, provide a better employee experience, better support the hybrid work experience, right? And so a lot of IT leaders today are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have this pressure to reduce costs and have automation, but you also have these other things that, quite frankly, cost money to invest in if you're looking into, increasing device choice, for instance. And so some of the things that have come up very commonly as those major trends are things like, the increasing number and heterogeneity of endpoints, right? Employees want choice. If I look at the data today, a vast majority of the employees want choice, not just in their devices, but also in their applications and services that they use for work. That has only increased over time. And guess what? It's even more higher of a priority for those in the younger generations, like Gen Z and millennials, who expect to have greater choice of devices and operating systems. So IT is having to contend with that complexity. It's not just this one-to-one Windows world anymore. It's supporting all these different form factors and operating systems. We also see that the fundamental model of sort of like locking down a device, connecting it to the domain, managing it as kind of an on-premises device just no longer applies in most use cases today, right? That data is gone from the data center. It is now outside. That was broken by the pandemic. And so organizations are having to support things in a remote first way. Even if you are a hybrid organization, you're needing to support that and invest in more modern endpoint management techniques to make sure that regardless of where someone is, they're getting the support that they need. So that is a huge investment in and of itself. At the same time, we're dealing with massive talent shortages. You saw it in the upfront slide there that people don't feel like they have the right skills and experience. There's also the case that organizations just don't have the staff to be able to go out and say, I'm going to hire an expert for every single operating system that I manage. Now it's I need to have someone that can orchestrate that experience across multiple different devices and operating systems, right? So the overall talent shortage is contributing to major changes in the way that we deliver and manage and retire those endpoints in the enterprise. And then finally, of course, there's always this focus of security. It's always a top of mind. It's always changing. It's literally never going to go away. So you're always going to be contending with that as an IT organization. And a lot of the clients I'm working with today are starting to say, how can I make that process of IT operations and security operations much more connected and more seamless? And they're looking for a lot of these platform tools to enable them to do that. And then lastly, I should say that AI, of course, is on the top of mind for everybody. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But that's the vision. People want to move towards AI-enabled endpoint management. But we're still a long way from achieving that kind of autonomous vision. So those are the top things that I'm hearing about from clients.
Andrew, how do you deal with bullying for being the only person in the marketing department with a Windows PC? Do you have any recommendations there? Everyone else has a Mac and I've got a PC and I get bullied for it constantly.
Oh, that's yeah. I mean, I think it's yeah, it's tough. It's really all about preference, right? But you also need to test things. I mean, Windows still is the dominant operating system, in the enterprise today. It's definitely getting pressure from other operating systems, but being able to test things in that environment is also good as well. So, maybe those folks aren't doing their part in understanding how Windows contributes in that vein.
So I heard five major themes from you there, Andrew. One
Yeah.
is more devices, more heterogeneity, and really that boils down less to the device and more about end users or employees expecting more choice and more
Yeah.
availability. Particularly with things like SaaS applications, everything's just at their fingertips, and this can lead to things like shadow IT. It can lead to more complexity for IT orgs. It can lead to greater challenges around security and workflows. I heard major changes in how people work from everyone being in the office to the pandemic breaking that and everyone going remote. And now you have the majority of organizations being hybrid. And that makes everything more difficult because you have both ways of working, and that just adds additional complexity.
Mhm.
So, more complexity, more choice, fewer resources. Budgets aren't growing, headcount isn't growing. There are massive talent shortages. Even if you have the ability to hire people, it's hard to find the right people. Um, Changing work modes within IT and security where they're coming together, and then everyone's 5,000 pound gorilla in the room, which is AI. Awesome. Thank you for going over those. I don't see any questions about those in particular, so I'll just move on to the next one. If they come up, you have questions about those later, we'll come back and address them. So the next question I had, and this goes back to that the slide we showed earlier around automation. It's a bit of a paradox. Ninja positions ourselves as the automated endpoint management platform. We've recognized and invested in automation as a solution, but what we see is that the companies that need it most often don't have the ability to invest in it.
Mhm.
It's hard. Can be complex. There may be talent issues. So, how can IT teams move from like the nascent use of automation, that level one of just deploy a script, to more mature, value-driven automation?
That's a great question. And I like to break down automation basically in like three phases. And what you're talking about there in terms of the nascent use of automation, building a script and just having a policy that runs that script, every time an event happens, I would characterize as being a reactive form of automation, right? Something has already happened, therefore I'm gonna push that out. My sense with clients today is about 75% of them are in that bucket, like still very reactive approach to automation today, right? We're still very new and kind of applying all this automation to endpoint management. And so that approach, definitely fixes things, but it's not something that's kind of self-healing over time. In other words, it's not going to be able to self-correct itself and be able to drive this at scale. The next phase of this is more of that proactive piece, and that's where you start bringing in a lot more of that orchestration. So you can fix something before it actually hits the end user and they start complaining about it and bringing it to your help desk, right? I would say about, 20% are in that proactive bucket where they have started to invest in not just building scripts and having rules, but having more complex logic that has multiple variables that they can look at to fix things, not just once, but fix it forever, whenever it comes up, right? It comes up at that time. I see that, I can automate it immediately. It's not just, oh, we see this problem, let's tell the help desk they can push out the fix that we've already pre-built, right? So a lot of organizations are moving towards that proactive. Like I said, about 20% of the folks that I work with are moving in that direction. The last piece of this is more of that AI driven. And I would say, a liberal number here would be about 5% of organizations that are really taking advantage of AI and applying it to automation. And what that actually looks like is if you think about proactive, right? Proactive fixes the issue before it hits the user, right? So you're dealing with that time span. AI driven basically says, hey, we start to see conditions that may indicate that a problem is about to occur, so we're going to fix it before the problem occurs. So that little time span that you have in proactive is actually eliminated with the AI driven piece. So we have talked to some clients that have some success there, but that is a very new process that a lot of organizations are dealing with. So that would be the first thing, is to kind of think about where are you in that overall journey and start to think about how can you move the needle towards more of that proactive, or if you're already doing a lot of proactive, are the ways that you can start experimenting with AI driven models.
Before we move on, I would love to hear from everyone in chat. Where do you guys feel you are? Who here feels they're in that level two? Who feels that they've started to address that level three, AI driven, proactive, even like sort of looking around corners approach to automation? Would love to hear from you all. I also want to call out something Randy said in chat. Ultra lean staffing roadblocks development of automation in his experience. I can't overstate that. I mean, if you don't have the ability to invest in and continuously improve on automation, if you don't have the people to invest there, it's really hard to not only build those initial automations, but then track the value and prove it so that you can invest more. Any thoughts there, Andrew, on where to start if that staffing and talent shortage is really a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great point, right? Someone that's overworked, that's moving towards burnout, is likely going to pursue an automation because they can't survive in their work without doing that, right? So I think that's a really good point there. I think the biggest thing is really providing that culture and freedom from a leadership perspective to allow those people to spend some time on that, right? I think the biggest thing that I see with organizations is that they're not able to automate because they're just spending so much time fighting fires. And nobody at the executive level has said, hey, this doesn't really make sense for you to just be spending 40 hours of your week fighting fires. Let's give you 20% of that time back to actually think about how can we automate that. So it's all about building that culture of automation. The individual has to have that psychological safety to say, hey, if I automate things, it's not going to mean that I'm going to automate myself out of a job. Although hopefully I can use it to get a promotion. But the organization also has to provide that safety too and say, hey, this is actually part of your job. Figure out a way to do this better. Don't spend your time fighting those fires. So it's really about building that culture of automation and making sure people feel safe making those experiments.
That's a really good call out. People who are scared that, I'm going to automate myself out of a job, that is a real and pervasive blocker to AI adoption. Sorry, automation adoption. I do want to call out, like, I'm bad at math, but I did like a quick look at people's response on where they are. I have to say, it seems like it pretty much matches up to like 80, 21% on the levels that you gave, which is, it never works out that well in webinars, but I'm glad to see it did work out this time.
That's good.
Um,
Yeah.
one last thing on this topic before we move on. When you have those mature partners, maybe those late phase two, early phase three partners, do you have anything you can share about sort of the impact that this has on their organization? Where are they seeing the best and biggest results?
One of the key areas is in root cause analysis. I think one of the major use cases for AI within endpoint management today would be not the generative AI use cases, but actually more of the anomaly detection, machine learning algorithms that are looking at complex sets of data and being able to derive information from that. And root cause analysis is a really great use case for that. If I can pinpoint by sifting through a ton of data very quickly, I've had examples of customers of mine that are saving, thousands of engineering hours based off of that use case alone. So that's a one that I've seen quite a bit of success with. I've also seen success applying that to low code orchestration techniques where I can one take that fix and then I can start to apply it across multiple different workflows. And that ends up saving me time the next time that type of issue pops up as well. So those use cases that are really focused on the anomaly detection pieces are really good fertile grounds to start taking some steps on the AI. Generative AI is more of a newer trend within this space. We'll start to see that become more sophisticated, but right now it's a lot of testing out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. I think the most important question just came in from Liz. Is that a surfing stormtrooper behind you?
Yes, that is a surfing stormtrooper. I've always wondered if the stormtroopers ever got any PTO, but turns out they do, and they're big surf fiends. So the Empire does let them do that, which this is surprising to me.
Awfully nice of them.
Yes.
The next question I have here is around point solutions and platforms. So every analyst is talking about it. Every IT leader I talk to is talking about it. There is an overwhelming preference for a move from point solutions to platforms. Are you seeing the same thing? What's driving this needs, and what are the benefits that your clients are getting from moving here? And then I guess last, what are some cautionary words and the why not of it?
Yeah. So with all this complexity we talked about earlier, like multiple different operating systems, device form factors, increased security threats, etc., the point product approach is really difficult to execute because one, it costs a lot because you're paying the licensing costs for every single one of those point products. You don't have integration in place. So if you're trying to do automation, it can be very difficult. And two, it's going to require you to hire experts across every one of those point products, right? So the platform has now come in and said, here's a way to streamline things. We can connect the data underneath and make these really integrated capabilities as opposed to point products. We can train everybody on the same platform so they understand how to do that. And we're all looking at the same data. We're not, trying to export a bunch of data into Power BI and share that with the security team and vice versa back to IT ops, right? So the platform approach is really emerging as the preferred approach in many use cases for enterprise clients today. So we'll expect to see that, coming up even more so. I would say that the platform approach, speaking of some of the cautionary pieces, provides a lot of benefit, but you also want to make sure that you have the capabilities that you need, and that you're fitting the specific business needs that you're looking for. For example, maybe you want something that's super in-depth around a certain operating system because you're really making a strategic move in that direction. It can be okay to have a specific point product for that. Or we often see point products in security, for example. Other business use cases, like let's say you're a large multinational company, and in certain geographies, you're not allowed to have that same cloud product that's spread across multiple geographies. That may be a case where maybe you want like an on-prem version of a point product, right? So there are use cases that come up, but for the vast majority of clients that I work with today, they're trying to simplify and bring that platform-based approach so that they can reduce those licensing costs, they can have a shared data set, and they can foster a lot more collaboration across those different teams that may be looking previously at separate point products.
One of the things that we see a lot is one of the lowest hanging fruits, I think, is we see a lot of people consolidating sort of server, end user computing, and mobile devices all into a single platform, or similarly, like the Windows and Mac management capabilities into one. There's been, a long history of point solutions in those spaces, but getting all of those into a single pane of glass, having the single data set, having one platform to automate across on all of those has been one of the biggest benefits I think our clients have seen, and one of the biggest trends we've seen in 2024 and now into 2025.
Mhm.
Um, When you look at your customers, something I see is customers who take a platform approach from Ninja. So multi-product buyers from Ninja, as I'd call them, have some of the most mature automation and highest uses of automation in the industry. Do you see something like that as well, like deeper investment in platform leading to deeper automation?
It's certainly a core benefit, right? You can do automation with point products. I mean, don't get me wrong, but you're going to have to do a lot of integration work. You probably need to hire partners and things to be able to do that. You're going to be exporting data to third-party systems. It can work, but it's very complex and can actually take you more time than if you were just to have the platform-based approach from the beginning. Everything's fully integrated. I'm able to connect X with Y with Z, and I can drive that automation. So, it's possible, but it's going to be a lot easier in a platform-based approach.
Yeah, this kind of also mirrors the trend in the talent on the talent side of, having a Mac engineer, a Mac end user computing engineer, a Windows end user computing engineer, networking engineers, whatever, people for that are specialized in kind of each type of device in each use case. We're seeing those consolidate into sort of device
Mhm.
management engineers. So it's interesting to see that happening on the talent side and on the technology side.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a really close friend of mine that's a Mac engineer, and they're paying top dollar for him because it's an expensive, particular role to hire for, right? And so that can be a showstopper for a lot of organizations is one, those people are hard to find, and then two, when you do find them, you have to pay them a lot. And so people are moving into more of that orchestration mentality so that people can manage multiple operating systems rather than just being the expert in one. But in some cases, that person may be necessary, as I mentioned too. But it's becoming more rare over time.
Awesome. Thanks so much on that one, Andrew. Let's move on to question number 4 here. This one, a bit of a contentious statement, but I don't think too many people would disagree that in many organizations, IT and security can be at odds. And this comes from a lot of different areas, different data sets, different tools, different workflows, different goals and responsibilities, overlapping goals and responsibilities. But what we're seeing in our customers, in the IT leaders I talk to, is that in some of the most mature organizations, security and IT are moving closer together. They're starting to work more together, and looking towards sharing, goals and responsibilities. What's driving this change? How will functional responsibilities change in the future? Is this good or bad? What's going on
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, this is something that we're certainly seeing in certain enterprise segments when you get mature enough. You still have a separate security and a separate IT team, but the platform approach is allowing those two groups to work more seamlessly together, right? And what's driving that is a need from a security and compliance perspective, especially when you look at things like vulnerability and patch management. It's no longer all about, okay, how quickly can you patch something and show me the audit data around that? It's how long were you exposed? And can I take that exposure time and reduce it as much as possible so I can reduce those compliance violations and security threats that may be in my environment, right? So the marker is evolving for IT and security teams to be a lot faster. And that is causing a lot of these folks to start to reconsider how do we play together as an organization. Security is often the ones that's kind of like the order giver, and IT is just kind of taking the orders and rolling with it. In my experience, especially at the large enterprise, that's becoming more of an integrated experience, and the platform approach is one of the key ways that folks are pushing in that direction as well. So vulnerability and patch management is a great first use case because IT and security have always worked together on that, but not in the most optimal way. So I'm seeing a lot of IT organizations today prioritize that as a first use case to begin working across the aisle with both. And the other major driver here, beyond just the fact that I need to work faster as an organization, is that the native operating system security controls are getting more sophisticated day after day after day, right? And so, in a lot of cases, what we see from our data and also from my anecdotal stories is organizations tapping into the native security capabilities of the operating system a lot more frequently and reducing their reliance on third-party security technologies. So what does that mean for IT? Now I have visibility into that from an endpoint management. I can just go in and I can see, okay, encryption is turned on, I have the right device posture, etc. And I can just tap into the APIs of that operating system in a way that's a lot simpler than it was in the past, where maybe I needed a third-party tool to be able to do that. And so that shift from third-party into native operating system security is also one of the areas that's giving IT a little bit more stake in the game because they have more control over those policies within the endpoint management systems themselves.
Yeah, one of the great examples that this was an entirely customer-driven exploration for us, but Ninja released the capability to ingest vulnerability data from vulnerability scanners
Hmm.
because so often there's this back and forth between IT and security. Security saying, "Hey, you have these vulnerabilities." IT is saying, yes, we do, but there's a reason I haven't patched that. Here's this information. This patch keeps failing. It's causing, challenges whenever we roll it out. This is a critical system that will impact X, Y, and Z. We need to wait longer. Like IT has their reasons, security has their reasons, but when you have separate data sets that don't talk to each other, it's really
Hmm.
hard to have a really good, productive conversation and actually move the ball forward. And so,
Totally.
when we released our vulnerability ingestion capability, it was to solve that because those workflows are coming together. Before it was, hey, here's a vulnerability, let's open a ticket, IT will go solve it at some point, and we'll yell at them if they don't. Bringing those two together makes it much more efficient, effective, and secure, which is fantastic.
Definitely.
Um,
Yep.
any recommendations for IT leaders here, like where to push to bring these two teams together? Vulnerability and patching being one of them, but any other areas where the CIO CISO can work together to drive better workflows here?
Well, one of the other areas beyond the vulnerability patch management is just device posture in and of itself, right? There's a lot of things that the endpoint management player can do to go and verify that the device is fundamentally in a state of good posture. So, is encryption turned on? Does it have a password? Does it have the most recent patches? Has it gone through the right authentication steps? Does it have certificates installed? Things of that nature, right? There's a lot there that is super valuable from a security perspective that IT can help enforce because the endpoint management platform isn't necessarily, providing the security in the same sense as a security tool would, but it is making sure that that foundation of good device health and hygiene is really strong. And so for IT leaders, if you're looking out there and saying, how do I work with security a little bit more? Ask yourself, what's in it for them as a security person? What would be really interesting and useful for them to have from a data perspective that you could provide? And that's one of the big conversations that's helping driving more of that convergence beyond the platform. It's what role can IT provide in an outbound way to security leaders to help give them the right information to help them succeed in their jobs.
Yeah, the answer is not always technology. Sometimes it's reaching across the aisle and building
Yep,
relationships internally.
totally. Yep.
Awesome. So the last question I have here, I want to make sure we have a lot of time to answer the many questions that have come in. Is a little bit of a self-serving one. It's about endpoint management, and we're the automated endpoint management platform. So, endpoint management obviously touches on a lot of what we've discussed today.
Hmm.
Supporting new and heterogeneous business models and device types, providing an automation capability to automate those most repetitive and difficult tasks in IT, building a platform to centralize all your device management, supporting end users, even driving better security outcomes through patching and configuration capabilities. Um, you cover the endpoint management space. What are your clients benefiting from most as they adopt endpoint management, particularly modern endpoint management capabilities, and
Hmm.
what's driving their adoption?
So I would highlight four key things. One is cost. Two is streamlined IT operations management. Three is experience. So the end user experience is improved. And four is security. So those four things I typically see as key outcomes if you're able to modernize your approach to endpoint management. So let's talk a little bit about how each of those manifests itself. From a cost perspective, right? The platform-based approach, obviously there's some licensing recoup that you can do there. But there's also, again, like you mentioned a number of times, that shared data model that allows you to do the automation so that you're saving engineering hours, remediating things through automation rather than just having to do it yourself, right? So there are some big cost benefits there. From a streamlined operations perspective, right, it's just a more simplified approach to management. Oftentimes, we're able to manage multiple different operating systems from a single platform, and I can say, here's a policy for Andrew, and here's a policy for you, Peter. That's going to go across all of your devices. It's not going to be, okay, I need to set one policy for Andrew's Mac, one for his Windows, one for his iOS and Android. I don't have all those operating systems, but you get the picture. It's a much more simplified approach. And as the operating system vendors themselves build more management hooks into the operating system, that's going to become easier to execute over time. So streamlined operations would be key. Experience is one that we haven't really talked too much about here today, but there's a big benefit in collecting the end user experience telemetry through this platform-based approach and being able to provide a resilient foundation for productivity for the end user. In other words, if you're able to manage your device estate well and have good hygiene, have very resilient devices, people are going to be less interrupted by things like blue screens of death and app crashes. They're going to have a less frustrating experience because their devices are going to be faster and more and kind of intuitive for them to use, etc. So there's a lot of benefits of kind of that DEX or digital employee experience that you get from having this endpoint management modernization approach in place. And the final thing,
That's actually
security, I won't touch too much on it, but security is a major piece because you are reducing that amount of time that you're either exposed or you're spending time, patching endpoints with vulnerability. So that common data set rapidly increases that time, or decreases that time, excuse me, from initial exposure to remediation.
Thank you for that, Andrew, and thank you for that reminder. I was going to pivot after this to, there's this trend that, we call it endpoint management, but ultimately you're managing an endpoint to support a user, and so it's
Yep.
all of IT is becoming more end user centric. This isn't new. We've always known the end user was critical, their satisfaction and productivity was critical, but there's an emerging or re-emerging focus on this area and the benefits that you can get from focusing on the end user and using operational technology to support them. Where is this coming from, and what are you hearing from clients in this area around DEX or user experience?
One of my biggest inquiry topics by far. So I've been covering the DEX market now for I think about 6 years. And it initially came from this idea that technology was ultimately negatively impacting the employee experience. We had a report that was initially went out, and one of the graphic titles was "Your technology environment is a hot mess of distraction," because devices were breaking, notifications were coming in unprompted, the applications were crashing, the network was slow, right? The technology environment needs to get out of the way and enable people to be successful at work. If you think about your like best day at work, do you remember the role that technology played in it? Probably not, because it was just in the background, right? And so a lot of organizations today that I'm working with are prioritizing that DEX so that a poor DEX isn't something that negatively impacts the employee and their ability to provide business results for the organization. So this idea of DEX is all about collecting that end user telemetry data within the endpoint management platform and then being able to use that to drive proactive remediation of an issue so it doesn't impact an employee, or if there is an issue, have faster root cause analysis so I can get them up and running quicker, or providing a measurement around the overall health of the digital experience. And this is a big area that's really hitting the endpoint management market, square on. Of course, there are standalone DEX players, but many endpoint management vendors today are bringing in the DEX capabilities as well. So we expect this to be a big area of interest over the next couple of years as people try to bring more of that data-driven approach to into their endpoint management strategy.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, the future of IT is user centric. I
Mhm.
do want to do a quick wrap up here and then jump over to questions. So I'll just do a quick like summary of what we went through today. Major trends impacting IT. You've got uh, talent challenges. You have device heterogeneity and more devices being used and more choice, new work modalities, AI, all of those things at a macro level changing how IT works. You're seeing automation move, many more organizations move from no automation to that level one reactive to that level two proactive, and then a future state where it's not only proactive but potentially fully managed by itself and
Mhm.
taking care of things before they become an issue. We're seeing, IT leaders move from point solutions to platforms to get the benefits of automation and efficiency and cost reduction, and the talent benefits around training and enablement. We are seeing, a user-centric approach to IT coming at the forefront of, the largest and most mature IT organizations. The combination of IT and security, that'll never be complete, but seeing workflows come together as people adopt tools that allow those unified workflows, as they work on single data models, and as those leaders reach across the aisles and build the relationships they need to.
Mhm.
And then finally, the benefit of a platform-based endpoint management solution within large IT organizations, and how that drives efficiency, automation, and user centricity, all of those things. So, Andrew, I cannot thank you enough for your expertise and the feedback you provided here, and the overall information and knowledge you've just shared with our audience here. I do want to switch over and talk questions, because there are quite a few here.
Mhm.
For our prospects, customers, partners, IT leaders on the call, I am going to prioritize those that are more industry focused. There are a lot of product questions here. If I get to the end and I run out of the first kind, I'll get to those. But I want to focus on those big trends, and take some of Andrew's brain here and translate it for all of you. Um, so let me jump in and see if I can find some really good ones here. Um, let's see. A lot of these are Ninja-centric. I apologize here, Andrew.
You got a lot of enthusiastic customers, which is good.
We do. Uh, so when you look at AI tools, there's a lot of benefit, there's a lot of risk. How do you find tools that help you automate processes, give you visibility, but without introducing too much risk into the equation? You're essentially giving, with an endpoint management solution, the keys of the kingdom to a third party tool that you have little control over. How do you drive that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think a best course of action for a lot of folks here too is if you're thinking about, okay, I want to bring in something new to enable AI on some of these, systems. That's probably not the best approach because you're not familiar with that particular vendor. You're not sure, in many cases, what level of privacy and protection is going to be in place there. So my recommendation is start with enlightening your existing applications or software with some of those AI capabilities. And when you go and talk about that with the vendors, you really need to be very clear in terms of how are they using the data, how are they charging for that, because sometimes that may come with a up level cost. And how are they really trying to help you make sure that that AI is actually trustworthy, right? So I wouldn't bring in any new vendors into this conversation. I would stick with many of the existing tools that you have and start to experiment from there. Ultimately, if you do bring in another third-party vendor, you got to go through a whole due diligence process and testing, etc. So that would be my recommendation, would be kind of start small with what your existing tool sets are, and really go back and forth with your vendor to establish the right SLAs around privacy, around cost, around trustworthiness, of that AI system itself.
Awesome, thank you. I'm I'm trying to come through here. I think, unfortunately, most of these questions are Ninja related. I'm gonna jump in and start answering some of them. If you have any thoughts as I jump in,
Sure.
um, I would love your input here. Here's one. Many tools, including Ninja, don't have perfect parity between, let's say, Mac, Windows, and Linux, the primary operating systems.
Mhm.
That is a gap that we have. We're working to get them all aligned, and investing more in all of our operating systems, Windows being probably the most robust. Um, so the question here is, how do we reduce that gap, and how critical is it for a one-to-one-to-one? My response would be, we're investing heavily. One of our biggest releases of this year will be significant upgrades to our Mac management capabilities within the first half of the year. That's for Rob. But Andrew, would love to hear your thoughts on getting that parity between the major operating systems.
Yeah, there's a couple of things here that I would mention, right? A lot of customers ask me that question too. Like, is a vendor going to be able to fill a particular gap around macOS is probably one of the more common ones, because there are, established point solutions there. Um, and The key is to really look at what the roadmap items are for the upcoming year and make sure that you have visibility into that higher level product management to be able to provide the confidence that those releases are going to come out, right? Because sometimes you'll see a roadmap and then they won't actually deliver on it. If your vendor, it has a roadmap and they've consistently delivered against that over the years, then that's a good chance of saying, hey, maybe I can invest in this now, and they're going to be able to fill some of those gaps as we go further, right? So that's one of the questions that you need to ask yourself. The second question there too is being aware that you're not just replicating the old legacy process again. Just because a vendor doesn't support every single bell and whistle of the third party doesn't mean that it's not the right solution, because it may actually be simpler and more effective and more seamless for you to go with something that's been built within the last few years versus something that was built 15 to 20 years ago. So you do need to do some rationalization on your part to understand, is the way that we're actually managing this now in the point solution really the best way to do it? And if so, then yeah, stay with that. If not, then maybe it's okay to look at a more lightweight solution that doesn't have as many bells and whistles, but that still gets you all of what you need, or the majority of what you need. So I think a lot of folks tend to think it needs to have every single feature, but that may be overkill for your particular use case.
Yeah, there's this delicate equation between like the balance of operating systems in your environment, the complexity of the use case and endpoint management for each operating system, and then the efficiency and automation benefits of sort of single pane of glass, single pane for reporting.
Mhm.
For example, if you're trying to generate a report on all your IT assets or all of your endpoints at least, it doubles the amount of work if you have two systems. If you want to roll out automations, you can combine schedules if it's single pane. You can't otherwise. The amount of training and enablement done on
Mhm.
multiple platforms versus one, as we've talked about. So it is a delicate equation, and it depends entirely on the IT leaders and their capabilities and the organizational needs. So thank you for that, Andrew.
Mhm.
Um, I've got another one here. It's interesting. I'd love your overall thoughts on this. I'll answer the question directly, but it's on the concept of device provisioning. So OS deployment, device provisioning, etc. So the particular question from Logan is, how can we set up full packages of installations in a way like imaging a PC? So today, NinjaOne does not do image deployment directly. We have some guides that show you how to do that using Microsoft tools, for example. What we focus on is post image customization. So being able to customize and automate setup at scale after deploying like a light image. And we do that through, policy-based automation, software deployment, configuration scripts, that sort of thing. Where is OS deployment and device provisioning going? Particularly with things like Autopilot and Apple Business Manager becoming more
Yep.
robust.
Yeah, it's certainly going to factory deployment. Where basically exactly what you're talking about, where you have this base image and then you use policy to customize it. It's no longer the case that every single IT organization out there is creating, 5 to 6 golden images that all have different characteristics, etc. Like, the ability to do that through policy and through automation is the future of the way that that's going. The only cases where I see, imaging happening still pretty frequently is in a massive, outage of the system itself. And they don't want, the IT doesn't want to go figure out what actually went wrong, so they just wipe and reload the image. That's unfortunately still, I think, too common. There's a lot of things you could do from like a DEX perspective to help out there, but that overall concept of imaging everything and maintaining this master, golden image list is something that's going away and is being transitioned towards the policy-based approach.
Yeah, they're OS deployment, device provisioning in sort of that traditional fashion. We see it a lot, and quite often um, the new methods of provisioning devices are much more efficient and effective. And there's an education gap in some cases. There's a investment gap where people have to transition to new tools and new ways of doing things. And then there's in the worst case scenario, there, hey, this is the way I've always done it, and so I'm going to stick that way. But we are seeing more and more companies transition to that more modern deployment capability. Um, I think maybe second to last question that I want to jump through here. There's a slew of questions around AI in a row. And the first one is how does Ninja use AI today? I'd love to answer that. I'm super happy with this capability. I was involved in identifying this as a use case. Our overall story around AI is it's incredibly powerful. It will be a core part of any product in the future. There's no way companies can be successful without including AI in their products. And so we actually added AI to our product for the first time in our fall release, and it's called Patch Sentiment Analysis. And this actually ties into the autonomous endpoint management category. It ties into vulnerability and patch management. It also ties into DEX in some cases.
Mhm.
What the capability in Ninja does is it for every OS patch today, it's only focused on OS patching today, that comes out, we do a market level sentiment analysis of the patch. Is this likely to cause issues when you deploy it? Are other people talking about issues? Are other people seeing patches fail? And what is the recommendation for how to use, how to or not deploy this patch? So two examples that I've seen from customers in our Discord channel, actually, they brought these up. One was they kept getting a blue screen of death on their VDI when they deployed a patch. They went in, they looked at patch sentiment analysis. It specifically called out that people were complaining that when you roll out this patch, it kills the VDI capability. And they were able to roll that back, decline that patch, and move forward and avoid the really deep, potentially root cause analysis to find out what the heck happened here. So it really got them back up and running faster. The second was not too long ago, Windows rolled out a patch on servers that upgraded to their latest version of upgraded from what was it to Server 2024. And there are licensing implications of that. There are a whole lot of operational impacts of that. And again, patch sentiment analysis went and looked at the market and said, what are the challenges being faced by this KB? We recommend that you do not deploy this until you do more research. People who dived in really saw that they could avoid deploying this patch and avoid the operational and licensing impacts of
Mhm.
that. And so that's the first thing we've rolled out. Our broader strategy is to provide you with actionable information that helps you make better decisions and build that into your IT operations rather than giving, a tool as powerful as an endpoint management, the keys to the kingdom, the ability to take action for you without human intervention. So that's our strategy and our vision. Andrew, what are you seeing as the major uses of AI, and what are you seeing from a strategic perspective? Like, what's the risk appetite of IT leaders around AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of IT leaders are justifiably concerned um, when you're handing over something that has the potential to cost you, either in terms of money or a job or something. It's always scary, right? So organizations are definitely in that piloting testing mode with that. And it's going to take some time to build that trust. But I also think some of those use cases that you mentioned are perfect examples of like don't do something because it's been proven externally that that's not going to work. And that external benchmarking use case, I think, is one of the key ones. I would add driver updates to that too, because that's an area too where you can isolate, hey, it's this Windows driver that's causing a massive issue, or this Intel, driver is causing an issue. So that's definitely one that comes up quite a bit. I would say to echo some of my earlier thoughts on some of the AI use cases, I do think there's a lot in terms of the DEX use cases of being able to do root cause analysis, provide suggested remediations on different things as well. But even just the basic use cases of, hey, tell me what's going on in my environment and create a dashboard that helps me show the C-level executives my level of posture across the environment. Like there's some of those basic things that were pretty hard to create, honestly, within endpoint management platforms before that are getting easier with the introduction of natural language.
Awesome. I'm gonna try to sneak in one more because it's specific to Dex, and you are the authority on Dex, and it's from Jake Heller, and it's really simple, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. One of the most complicated issues is simultaneously simple, but how do you best advise handling required user restarts on things like patch management? Deep impact on the user experience, very
Yep.
simple thing. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of those things it's difficult because I think IT does, it is scared of interrupting the user in a lot of cases and having them lose their work. I mean, because that's just That's just something that's happened so many times. But there's also the reality of like if the user ignores the prompts multiple times, at some point it's on them to take it, take security seriously within their organization as well. So, my recommendation is to have a flexible approach that gives people a little bit of autonomy to choose when and how that patch is going to be installed, but only up to a point. Like if you're going days and days where you can't get a patch going and it's a critical vulnerability, like that's too long. If the user is going to lose their work, I would weigh the option. The user losing their work or a critical vulnerability in the environment, critical vulnerability is probably more important to take advantage of. So, it's one of those things where you just can't satisfy everybody all the time.
Awesome. One of our participants just called you a Dexpert, and I couldn't go without saying that out loud. That makes me. We are at time. There are two last things I want to highlight. One, again, this was recorded. It will be shared with you all. We did not get to about 80% of the product questions. I'm dropping my email in the chat. If you had product questions and you want to reach out and ask me, please feel free to do so. And finally, there is a giveaway. If you were the person chosen. I don't know why I said that. Check your email, keep an eye out for that. We are giving away a prize to one participant who attended. I want to thank all of you, our participants, for joining us. And Andrew, a huge shout out and thank you to you for all the expertise you've shared today, and for your surfing stormtrooper. He was the highlight of the show. We
Always.
really appreciate your time and your partnership in this, and I learned a lot. Hopefully, all of our participants did as well. So thank you
Of
so much,
course.
everyone.
Thanks for having me.